When Isabella signed the divorce papers, the room went dead silent. She didn't ask for a single penny. No alimony, no stocks, no fighting for the mansion. Her billionaire husband, Harrison, laughed in her face, calling her weak and claiming she'd be crawling back within a month. He thought he had destroyed her. He was wrong. 3 years later, the roar of a Gulfstream G700 interrupted his company's biggest night of the year. The door opened, and the woman who stepped out wasn't the broken ex-wife he left behind. She was the one coming to own him. This isn't just a story about revenge. It is a masterclass in the long game. Buckle up. The conference room on the 45th floor of the Nexus Tower in San Francisco smelled of stale espresso and aggressive cologne. It was a cold, glass-walled aquarium where love went to die, suffocated by billable hours. Harrison Smith sat at the head of the mahogany table, looking every inch the tech mogul he was. He wore a custom charcoal Brioni suit, the top button of his shirt undone, just enough to suggest he was casual about destroying his 10-year marriage. Beside him sat his lawyer, a shark named Arthur Pence, and, in a move of breathtaking cruelty, Chloe Danvers. Chloe was 24, the newly appointed VP of Marketing at Nexus, and the reason Isabella was currently staring at a 20-page settlement agreement. Isabella Smith sat alone on the other side. She wore a simple navy blazer and slacks that had seen better days. Her hands were folded on the table. She looked tired. Not hysterical, not angry. Just finished. "Let's review the terms one last time," Pence said, his voice oily. "Mr. Smith is generous. He is offering a lump sum of $2 million, plus the deed to the vacation home in Napa, provided you sign a strictly binding NDA regarding the proprietary algorithms of Nexus Dynamics." Harrison smirked, tapping his fountain pen against the glass table. "Take it, Bella. It's more than you deserve, considering you haven't contributed a damn thing to this company since the garage days. You get to keep the Smith name if you want. God knows it's the only valuable thing you have." Chloe giggled, a sharp, tinkling sound that grated on Isabella's nerves. "Harry, be nice. She needs something to retire on." Isabella looked up. Her eyes were clear, a piercing shade of grey that usually missed nothing, though Harrison had stopped looking at them years ago. She reached into her bag. "I don't want the money," Isabella said softly. Harrison stopped tapping. "Excuse me? I don't want the $2 million. I don't want the Napa house. I definitely don't want the alimony." Pence, the lawyer, frowned, adjusting his glasses. "Mrs. Smith, I advise you to reconsider. Under California law, you are entitled to half of the marital assets acquired during—" "I know the law, Mr. Pence," Isabella interrupted. Her voice wasn't loud, but it had a sudden, terrifying steadiness to it. "I am waiving my rights to the marital assets. I want a clean break. Today. Immediate dissolution." She pulled a pen from her purse. It wasn't a fancy Mont Blanc like Harrison's. It was a cheap plastic biro. She flipped to the back page of the agreement, crossed out the paragraphs detailing the payout, and initialed the changes. Then she signed her name at the bottom. Isabella Archer. Not Smith. Archer. Her maiden name. She slid the papers across the table. Harrison stared at the document, then burst out laughing. It was a barking, incredulous laugh. "You're serious? You're walking away with nothing? You're trying to play the martyr?" "I'm buying my freedom, Harrison. It's the only luxury I can afford." "You're an idiot," Harrison sneered, snatching the papers. "You think this makes you noble? It makes you pathetic. You'll be destitute in 6 months. Don't come crying to me when you're working retail." "I won't," Isabella said. She stood up, smoothing her jacket. She looked at Chloe. He cheats on his taxes. He snores when he drinks scotch. And the Quantum X code has a dependency issue in the third subroutine. Good luck, Chloe. You'll need it. Harrison's face went rigid. What did you say about the code? Isabella didn't answer. She walked to the door. Bella! Harrison shouted, his ego suddenly pricked by her lack of devastation. You walk out that door. You don't exist to me. You are nothing. Isabella paused with her hand on the handle. She didn't look back. That's the plan, Harrison. She walked out. The heavy glass door clicked shut, sealing her out of the empire she had helped build from the ground up, the empire where she had written the foundational code while Harrison slept, the empire where she had stayed in the shadows so he could be the genius. She took the elevator down 45 floors. When she stepped out onto the bustling San Francisco street, she checked her bank account on her phone. Balance, 40,300. $5. It was everything she had. She hailed a cab, not to a hotel, but to San Francisco International Airport. She wasn't going to Napa. She wasn't going to her parents. She had a one-way ticket to Zurich, economy class. Harrison thought she was walking away with nothing. He didn't know that the most valuable asset Nexus Dynamics had wasn't the servers or the brand. It was the brain of the woman he'd just discarded. And she was taking her intellectual property with her. 3 years later. The world moved fast in tech, but it moved even faster for Harrison Smith. For the first year, life was a party. With Isabella gone, there was no one to remind him of his humble beginnings, no one to tell him to slow down. He married Chloe in a lavish ceremony in Lake Como that cost $4 million and was covered by Vogue. The stock price of Nexus Dynamics hit an all-time high. He was the king of Silicon Valley. But by year 2, the cracks started to show. It began with small things. The Quantum X algorithm, the crown jewel of Nexus, started experiencing latency issues. Clients complained about data bottlenecks. Harrison screamed at his engineering team, firing the CTO and hiring a new one. But the problems persisted. The code was a labyrinth, and the only person who knew the map was the woman he had laughed out of the room. Harrison tried to patch it, but the patches were clumsy. Nexus started losing market share to a mysterious new competitor that had emerged out of Europe, Ether Systems. No one knew who ran Ether. They had no public CEO, no flashy headquarters, just a registered office in Zug, Switzerland, and a product that was faster, lighter, and more secure than Nexus. By the start of year 3, the rumors began. Nexus was bleeding cash. The board of directors was getting restless. Harrison was drinking more, his face puffy, his temper short. Chloe was spending more time at the spa and less time at home. The power couple was rotting from the inside. Harrison sat in his office, staring at a report on his iPad. Ether Systems had just secured a contract with the Department of Defense, a contract Nexus had held for 5 years. Who are they? Harrison muttered, throwing the tablet onto his desk. Who is behind Ether? We don't know, said his new assistant, a terrified young man named Greg. They operate through a blind trust, but what? There are rumors, sir. Industry chatter. They say the architect behind Ether is a ghost. Someone who's been writing code since the 90s but never published. Harrison rubbed his temples. He needed a win. He needed something to remind the world that he was still the golden boy. The gala, Harrison said suddenly. Sir, the Nexus annual gala. This Saturday. We're going to blow it out of the water. I want the press, the investors, the shareholders. I'm going to announce the Nexus 2.0 update. It's not ready, but I'll fake the demo if I have to. We need to pump the stock price. Is that wise? Greg asked. Do it, Harrison roared. And get me the guest list. I want every high-net-worth individual in California there. If they have a private jet, I want them on that tarmac." The invitations went out. It was billed as the Night of the Future. Black tie. An exclusive hangar party at the private airfield adjacent to the Nexus HQ. Harrison spent the next 3 days in a manic state, micromanaging the lighting, the catering, and the guest list. He barely spoke to Chloe, who was busy trying to secure a sponsorship deal for her failing lifestyle brand. On the morning of the gala, Harrison received a call from air traffic control at the private airfield. "Mr. Smith," the controller said, "we have a last-minute flight plan filed for arrival during the gala. It's a heavy, high-priority clearance." "Who is it?" Harrison asked, adjusting his cufflinks. "Musk. Bezos. The tail number is registered to a holding company called Archon Global. Aircraft is a brand-new Gulfstream G700. Registration, November 707 Echo X-ray." Harrison frowned. Archon Global? He didn't know the name, but a G700 was a $75 million jet. That was serious money. It had to be a potential investor, maybe a Saudi prince or a European conglomerate looking to buy him out. "Clear them for landing," Harrison said, a grin spreading across his face. "Give them the prime spot, right in front of the red carpet. If they have that kind of money, I want them walking straight into my party." Harrison hung up and looked in the mirror. He looked tired, but the suit, a midnight blue Tom Ford, hid the weight he'd gained. "Showtime," he whispered. He had no idea that the Echo X-ray in the tail number stood for something very specific. EX. The hangar at the San Francisco private airfield had been transformed into a cathedral of capitalism. The industrial steel beams were draped in sheer black silk, and thousands of fiber-optic lights hung from the ceiling, mimicking a star-filled night sky. It was a visual metaphor for Harrison's ambition, artificial, expensive, and designed to distract you from the void above. Harrison stood at the entrance, a flute of vintage Krug champagne in his hand, greeting the sharks. "Jim, good to see you," Harrison beamed, shaking the hand of James Caldwell, a venture capitalist from Sequoia who had been dodging his calls for 3 months. "Glad you could make it. You're going to love what we're unveiling tonight." Caldwell's smile was tight. "I hope so, Harrison. The street is nervous. That earnings call last quarter was difficult. Growing pains, Jim. Just growing pains. Nexus 2.0 fixes the latency issues. It's a quantum leap." Harrison lied with the ease of a sociopath. He clapped Caldwell on the shoulder and moved to the next guest. Chloe was nearby, posing for photographers against the "Step and Repeat" banner. She wore a shimmering silver dress that looked like chainmail. It was beautiful, but she looked brittle. The past 3 years hadn't been kind to her either. The stress of being Mrs. Smith, of managing the staff, the social calendar, and Harrison's explosive temper had etched fine lines around her eyes that even the best dermatologist couldn't erase. She drifted over to Harrison during a lull in the arrivals. "Are they buying it?" she whispered, sipping a vodka martini. "Smile," Harrison hissed through his teeth, waving at a tech blogger. "Of course they're buying it. They want to believe. If Nexus fails, half the portfolios in this room take a hit. They need me to succeed." "Arthur looks like he's going to vomit," Chloe noted, nodding toward the bar. Arthur Pence, the lawyer who had orchestrated Isabella's exit, was indeed looking green. He was cornered by a journalist from the Wall Street Journal. Harrison felt a spike of adrenaline. He walked over, intervening smoothly. "Talking shop, Arthur?" "Tonight is for celebration," Harrison said, steering the lawyer away. He leaned into Arthur's ear. "Pull it together. If you sweat any more, you'll slip on the floor." "Harrison, the rumors about ether systems," Arthur whispered, his voice trembling. "I heard something today." My contact in Zurich says they're filing a patent infringement suit against us." Harrison's blood ran cold. "On what grounds?" "The core architecture. They claim Nexus 2.0 is built on their IP." "That's impossible," Harrison scoffed, though his hand tightened on his glass. "We built it. It's my code." "Is it?" Arthur looked at him meaningfully. "Or is it the old code? The code she wrote?" "Don't say her name," Harrison snapped. "She's gone. She's probably teaching high school math in Ohio. Ether is just a patent troll. I'll crush them." The lights in the hangar dimmed. The music, a custom ambient mix by a trendy DJ, swelled. It was time for the keynote. Harrison adjusted his tie. He walked toward the massive stage erected at the far end of the hangar. A 60-foot LED screen displayed the Nexus logo. The crowd of 500, the elite of Silicon Valley, Hollywood, and Wall Street, hushed. Harrison bounded onto the stage, the spotlight hitting him. He loved this. The adoration. The focus. "Ladies and gentlemen," Harrison boomed, his voice amplified by a $1 million sound system. "3 years ago, we promised you the future. Tonight, we deliver it. Critics said we stalled. They said innovation was dead. Well," he paused for effect. "They were wrong." Applause rippled through the room. It was polite, not raucous. They were waiting for the meat. "I present to you," Harrison shouted, gesturing to the screen behind him, "Nexus 2.0, the world's first fully adaptive neural network." The screen flashed with complex graphics. It was a dazzling show. But Harrison knew the truth. The demo running on the server backstage was a loop. It was a pre-rendered video. If anyone asked for a live test, he was dead. "And to help us usher in this new era," Harrison continued, ad-libbing now, desperation creeping into his voice, "we are looking for partners, visionaries. I've heard rumors of a special guest landing tonight, a potential investor who understands that to win big, you have to bet big." As if on cue, a low rumble began to vibrate through the floor. It wasn't the bass from the speakers. It was deeper, physical. The guests turned their heads. Through the massive glass walls of the hangar that faced the runway, they saw floodlights piercing the darkness. A plane was taxiing toward the hangar. But this wasn't just a plane. It was a leviathan of the private aviation world. A Gulfstream G700, painted in a matte midnight blue that looked almost black, with silver accents along the wings. It moved with the predatory grace of a shark entering a swimming pool. Harrison stopped speaking. The crowd turned away from him, drawn to the spectacle outside. The jet turned, its engines whining with a high-pitched scream that cut through the music. It parked perfectly parallel to the hangar doors. The Archon Global logo on the tail was illuminated by the tarmac lights. "Who is that?" Chloe asked, her voice audible over the dying applause. Harrison stepped down from the stage. He had to greet them. This was the bailout. This was the money he needed to fight the lawsuit and fix the code. He checked his reflection in a window. He needed to look like an equal, not a beggar. "Open the hangar doors," Harrison commanded into his headset. The massive hydraulic doors groaned and began to lift, breaking the seal between the party and the cool night air. The smell of jet fuel mixed with the expensive perfume of the guests. The crowd surged forward, forming a semicircle around the entrance. Everyone wanted to see who stepped off a $75 million jet. Was it Bezos? A royal? A recluse billionaire? The engines spooled down. The silence that followed was heavy with anticipation. The stairs of the Gulfstream began to lower automatically, bathed in soft LED courtesy lights. Harrison straightened his jacket. He put on his best smile. He walked to the foot of the red carpet that had been hastily rolled out toward the tarmac. "Welcome to Nexus," he rehearsed under his breath. He wasn't ready. Nothing could have made him ready. First, there were the shoes. A pair of black Christian Louboutin heels, the iconic red soles flashing like a warning signal, stepped onto the top stair. They were sharp, stiletto-thin, and commanded authority. Then, the dress. It was a structured piece of architectural fashion, a deep emerald green velvet that absorbed the light rather than reflecting it. It was cut with a high neck, but a daringly low back, sophisticated and utterly severe. It was the kind of dress you didn't wear to attend a party. It was the dress you wore to hijack one. The woman descended the stairs slowly. She didn't look down at her feet. She looked straight ahead, into the blinding lights of the hangar. She wore sunglasses, despite it being 9 p.m. Oversized black frames that hid her face. Her hair, once worn in a messy bun during long coding sessions, was now a sleek, platinum blonde bob, sharp enough to cut glass. Harrison squinted. The silhouette was familiar, but the posture was wrong. This woman stood tall, her shoulders back, radiating a kinetic energy that terrified him. Behind her, a man in a suit carried a sleek leather briefcase. A bodyguard? An assistant? The woman reached the tarmac. She stopped. The hangar was silent. The DJ had cut the music. 500 people held their breath. She reached up and slowly removed her sunglasses. The hangar lights caught her eyes. Those grey, piercing eyes. Harrison felt the champagne turn to acid in his stomach. He stumbled back a step, bumping into Arthur Pence. "No," Harrison whispered. "No, no, no." It was Isabella. But it wasn't the Isabella he had divorced. That Isabella wore oversized sweaters and apologized for taking up space. That Isabella had rough hands from nerves and dark circles from working 18-hour days to build his dream. This woman was a statue carved from ice and diamonds. Her skin was luminous. Her makeup was flawless. She looked 10 years younger and $1 billion richer. She handed her sunglasses to the man behind her without looking at him. Then, she fixed her gaze on Harrison. She didn't smile. She didn't frown. She looked at him with the dispassionate curiosity of a scientist examining a bug under a microscope. She began to walk. The crowd, realizing who it was, or at least realizing that something monumental was happening, parted like the Red Sea. Isabella walked the red carpet, the click of her heels echoing on the concrete. "Is that his ex-wife?" someone whispered. "I thought she was broke," another murmured. "Look at that ring," a woman gasped. On her right hand, Isabella wore a single, massive sapphire ring, surrounded by diamonds. It was the only jewelry she wore, and it looked heavy enough to sink a ship. She walked straight up to Harrison. He was frozen, his mouth slightly open. Chloe, standing beside him, looked as if she had been slapped. Her silver chainmail dress suddenly looked cheap compared to the custom couture Isabella was wearing. Isabella stopped 3 feet from Harrison. She looked him up and down, taking in the weight gain, the sweat on his brow, the terror in his eyes. "Hello, Harrison," she said. Her voice was different, too. It was lower, richer. It had lost the tremulous quality it used to have when she tried to argue with him. This was the voice of a woman who gave orders, not one who took them. "Bella," Harrison choked out. What are you doing here? How did you—" He gestured vaguely at the massive jet behind her. "It's Isabella," she corrected him calmly. "And I received an invitation. You sent it to current resident at the Napa estate. I assume you forgot that I declined the house, so it sat empty until my acquisition team picked up the mail." "Acquisition team?" Arthur Pence squeaked. Isabella turned her gaze to the lawyer. Arthur shrank back. "Hello, Arthur. Still wearing polyester blends, I see." She turned back to Harrison. "I'm here for the demo, Harrison. I heard Nexus 2.0 is revolutionary." "It is," Harrison said, his defensive instincts kicking in. "It's incredible, but the jet, the clothes. Who are you with? Did you marry rich?" A small, genuine smile touched Isabella's lips. It was the most dangerous thing she had done yet. "Marry rich?" She laughed softly. "Oh, Harrison, you always did lack imagination." She signaled to the man with the briefcase. He stepped forward and handed her a tablet. "I didn't marry rich, Harrison. I became rich." She tapped the screen of the tablet, and suddenly, the massive 60-foot screen behind Harrison, the one displaying the Nexus logo, flickered. The Nexus logo dissolved. In its place, a new logo appeared. A stylized, elegant A. Ether Systems. The crowd gasped. The murmur turned into a roar. "What is this?" Harrison screamed, spinning around to look at the screen. "Cut the feed! Cut the video!" "You can't cut the feed, Harrison," Isabella said, her voice projecting clearly without a microphone. "Because you're running your system on my servers." Harrison froze. "What?" "Nexus 2.0, Isabella said, stepping closer to him, invading his space. "It's a patch job, a clumsy attempt to bypass the dependency issues in the original code, issues that existed because you fired the only architect who understood them." She turned to the crowd, addressing the investors directly. "My name is Isabella Archer. I am the founder and CEO of Ether Systems. For the past 3 years, I have been rebuilding what was stolen from me. Better, faster, and securely encrypted." She looked back at Harrison. "You asked who was behind Ether? Who was eating your market share? Who was stealing your government contracts?" She leaned in close, so only he could hear the next part, though the microphone on his lapel picked it up perfectly. "It was never a ghost, Harrison. It was just the wife you called weak. You own Ether." Harrison looked like he was having a stroke. "But you took nothing. You signed the papers. You have no money." "I took nothing of yours," Isabella corrected. "I left the money. I left the house. But I took the one thing you couldn't put a price tag on because you were too arrogant to understand its value." She tapped her temple. "I took the idea. The original Quantum X architecture wasn't property of Nexus until it was deployed. I wrote the foundational kernel after I left the building, on a laptop in a hostel in Zurich. I built Ether from scratch, Harrison. And today?" She paused, checking her watch, a Patek Philippe that cost more than Harrison's car. "As of 9 p.m. Geneva time, Ether Systems has initiated a hostile takeover of Nexus Dynamics." Silence. Absolute, suffocating silence. "We bought the debt, Harrison," Isabella said softly. "All of it. The bank loans you took out to cover the losses. Ether owns them now. We are calling in the notes." Harrison dropped his champagne glass. It shattered on the concrete, the sound like a gunshot. "You can't," he whispered. "I already have. You have 2 choices tonight. You can declare bankruptcy, in which case my forensic accountants will tear this company apart and find every cent you embezzled for your lifestyle expenses. Or..." She gestured to the man with the briefcase again. He opened it, revealing a single document. "You can sign over your remaining voting shares to me. Right now, in front of everyone." Harrison looked at the document. Then he looked at Chloe. Chloe was backing away, her eyes wide with panic. She wasn't looking at him. She was looking at Isabella with a mixture of fear and awe. "If I sign?" Harrison asked, his voice broken. "If you sign, I won't prosecute you for corporate fraud. I'll let you walk away, with nothing." Isabella smiled, and it was the same smile he had given her in the conference room 3 years ago. "You get to keep the Smith name," she mocked him. "God knows it's the only valuable thing you have left." Harrison looked at the crowd. 500 phones were recording him. He was ruined. The king of Silicon Valley was naked. He looked at the pen Isabella was holding out. It was a cheap, plastic biro. The same cheap pen she had used to sign the divorce papers. She had kept it for 3 years. Harrison's hand shook as he reached for it. The silence in the hangar was absolute, broken only by the hum of the servers cooling the massive LED screens and the distant rhythmic strobe of the Gulfstream's navigation lights. Harrison Smith stared at the cheap plastic pen. It was a BIC crystal, blue ink, the kind you buy in a pack of 10 for $1. It was the most insulting object he had ever seen. It was a ghost from a past he thought he had buried, a reminder of the days when they ate ramen on the floor of a rented garage, sketching code on napkins. Harrison's voice cracked. He looked up at the 500 faces staring at him. He saw pity in some, glee in others, but mostly he saw the predator's instinct. The herd sensed a wounded animal. They were already calculating how to distance themselves from him. "The clock is ticking, Harrison," Isabella said, her voice cool and devoid of malice, which made it infinitely worse. "The SEC filings are prepared. If you don't sign by midnight, the hostile takeover proceeds in court. And in court, everything comes out. The offshore accounts in the Caymans, the falsified beta test results, the bribes to the zoning commission." Harrison flinched. She knew. She knew everything. "You hacked me," he whispered, sweat stinging his eyes. "I audited you," she corrected. "There's a difference. One is illegal, the other is due diligence." Harrison looked at Chloe. His wife, his trophy, was trembling. Her mascara was running. She looked at him, not with love, but with the terrified realization that the credit cards were about to stop working. She took a step back, physically distancing herself from him on the red carpet. That small movement broke him. Harrison grabbed the pen. His hand shook so violently that he nearly dropped it. He pressed the tip to the document resting on the leather briefcase. Harrison Smith. He signed his empire away. As he lifted the pen, he felt a strange physical sensation, a lightness like the air leaving a balloon. It was the feeling of power evaporating. Isabella signaled to the man holding the briefcase. He snapped it shut, locking it with a sharp click. "Thank you," Isabella said. She didn't gloat. She didn't laugh. She simply turned her back on him. She faced the crowd, clapping her hands once to break the spell. "Ladies and gentlemen," her voice rang out, commanding the space instantly. "I apologize for the disruption. Change is often messy, but it is necessary." She gestured to the screen, where the Ether Systems logo glowed steadily. "The drinks are still cold. The food is still excellent. And as for the investment opportunities," she paused, a small, knowing smile playing on her lips. "Ether Systems is currently closed to outside investors. We are fully self-funded. However, I invite you all to stay and celebrate the merger. Tonight, Nexus becomes part of the Ether family. The glitches are gone. The future is finally here." The crowd hesitated for a fraction of a second. Then, James Caldwell from Sequoia Capital started clapping. Then the tech bloggers. Then the Hollywood stars. Within 10 seconds, the hangar was erupting in applause. They weren't applauding for justice. They were applauding the winner. Isabella walked off the red carpet, flanked by her security. She didn't look back at Harrison. Harrison stood alone in the center of the tarmac. The spotlight had moved off him. He was in the shadows. "Sir," Arthur Pence, his lawyer, whispered, appearing at his elbow. "We should go. The press. They're going to swarm." Harrison looked around. The photographers were indeed jockeying for position, lenses pointed at him like rifle scopes. "Get the car," Harrison croaked. "The driver left, sir," Arthur said, looking at his shoes. He said his contract was with Nexus Corp, and since the change of control clause was activated— "Everyone leaves," Harrison muttered. He looked at Chloe. "Chloe?" Chloe was standing near the buffet, frantically typing on her phone. She didn't look up. Harrison Smith, the man who had arrived in a limousine, turned his collar up against the wind and began the long walk toward the parking lot exit, dodging the very cameras he had invited. Inside the VIP section of the hangar, Isabella accepted a glass of sparkling water. She watched Harrison's retreating figure on a security monitor held by her assistant. "Do you want us to have him followed?" her head of security asked. "No," Isabella said, turning away from the screen. "He's irrelevant now. Let him go." She took a sip of water. The taste of victory wasn't sweet, she realized. It was clean. It tasted like cold air after being stuck in a smoke-filled room for 3 years. "Prepare the boardroom," she said to her assistant. "I want a full audit of the personnel files by morning, and schedule a meeting with the department heads for 8 a.m. We have a lot of dead wood to clear out." "And Mrs. Smith?" the assistant asked, gesturing vaguely toward where Chloe was weeping into a napkin near the shrimp tower. Isabella's eyes narrowed slightly. "Leave her to me. I have a separate meeting for her." Monday morning, 8 a.m., Nexus Tower. The elevators to the 45th floor were quiet. Usually, this was a time of chaotic energy, with junior developers rushing to get coffee before the stand-up meetings. Today, the building felt like a funeral home. Isabella walked out of the elevator. She wasn't wearing the gala gown anymore. She wore a sharp, cream-colored pantsuit that made her look like a modern-day celestial being. She walked past the reception desk. The Nexus sign on the wall behind the desk had already been removed. The wall was blank, waiting for the Ether brand. She pushed open the doors to the main conference room, the same glass aquarium where she had signed the divorce papers. The board of directors was waiting. 12 men and 2 women, all in expensive suits, all looking terrified. These were the people who had sided with Harrison. They had watched him push her out and said nothing because the stock price was rising. Isabella didn't sit. She stood at the head of the table. "Good morning," she said. Ms. Archer," the chairman of the board, a heavy-set man named Gerald, stammered. We want to assure you of our full cooperation during this transition. We believe that with your leadership—" "Save it, Gerald," Isabella said, placing a stack of files on the table. "This is a list of your voting records for the past 3 years," she continued. "You voted to cut the QA budget by 40%. You voted to outsource the security protocols to a subpar vendor to save 3 cents on the dollar. You voted to award Harrison a $10 million bonus while freezing entry-level salaries." She looked around the room. Ether Systems operates on a principle of technical excellence and ethical transparency. None of you fit that culture. "You can't fire the whole board," Gerald blustered, his face turning red. "We have contracts. We have tenure." "I'm not firing you," Isabella said calmly. "I'm dissolving the board. Nexus Dynamics no longer exists as a public entity. It is now a wholly owned subsidiary of Ether. Private companies don't require a public board of directors." She pointed to the door. "Your severance packages have been emailed to you. They are standard. I believe generous is the word you used when I was pushed out. 2 weeks' pay for every year of service. Good day." The silence was deafening. One by one, the masters of the universe stood up, gathered their briefcases, and shuffled out. They were dinosaurs watching the meteor hit. Isabella watched them go. When the room was empty, she sat down in Harrison's old chair. It was uncomfortable. Too much lumbar support. Too pretentious. "Send her in," Isabella spoke into the intercom. The door opened. Chloe Danvers walked in. Chloe looked terrible. She was wearing sunglasses indoors, likely to hide swollen eyes. She wore a trench coat and clutched a designer bag like a shield. She stopped at the end of the table, exactly where Isabella had sat 3 years ago. "Are you going to fire me?" Chloe asked, her voice trembling. "Or are you just going to humiliate me first?" Isabella studied the younger woman. She remembered the giggles. She remembered the smug look Chloe gave her when Harrison signed the papers. But looking at her now, Isabella didn't feel anger. She felt pity. "Sit down, Chloe." Chloe hesitated, then sat. She looked ready to bolt. "I'm not going to fire you," Isabella said. Chloe blinked. "What?" "You're the VP of marketing. Despite everything, you're actually quite good at your job. The Future is Now campaign was brilliant, even if the product was garbage. You have talent." Chloe looked confused. I don't understand. I stole your husband. I helped him push you out." "You didn't steal him," Isabella said dryly. "I let him go, and frankly, you did me a favor. You took out the trash." Isabella slid a thick manila envelope across the mahogany table. "This isn't a termination notice, Chloe." Chloe looked at the envelope. "What is it?" "Open it." Chloe opened the clasp with shaking fingers. She pulled out a stack of documents. She began to read. Her eyes went wide. She gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. This can't be true." "It is," Isabella said. "Harrison didn't just hide assets from me, Chloe. He hid them from everyone, including you." The documents were bank statements, credit card bills, loan applications. "He took out a second mortgage on the Lake Como house, the one he put in your name, without telling you," Isabella explained. "He forged your signature. He used the money to cover his gambling debts in Macau. And that's not all. Look at the last page." Chloe flipped to the back. "He has a separate LLC," Isabella said, "registered in Nevada. He's been funneling money from your lifestyle brand into it to pay for, let's call them consultants. Young women. Very young." Chloe dropped the papers. She looked sick. I thought he loved me. He told me I was the one who really understood him." "He told me that too," Isabella said softly. "Harrison only loves one thing, his reflection. Everyone else is just a mirror. When the mirror cracks, he gets a new one." Chloe put her head in her hands and began to sob. It was a raw, ugly sound, the sound of illusions shattering. Isabella waited. She let the younger woman cry. When the sobs subsided, Isabella spoke again. "You have a choice, Chloe. You can leave here, go back to him, and sink with the ship. He's going to be sued by half the city by next week. He'll drag you down with him. Your brand, your reputation, your credit score, it'll all be gone." Isabella leaned forward. "Or you can use what's in that envelope." Chloe looked up, mascara streaking her face. "Use it. That envelope contains enough evidence for fraud, forgery, and breach of fiduciary duty. It's also grounds for an immediate annulment of your marriage, not a divorce. If you annul, you aren't liable for his debts." Isabella stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the city she now owned a significant piece of. "I don't want to destroy you, Chloe. You were just a pawn. But I do demand loyalty. If you want to keep your job at Ether, if you want to keep your career, you handle Harrison. I don't want to see him. I don't want to hear from him. You make him go away." Chloe looked down at the papers. She wiped her eyes. Her expression changed. The brittleness vanished, replaced by a cold, hard rage. It was the rage of a woman who realized she had been played for a fool. She stood up. She closed the envelope and tucked it under her arm. "Consider it done," Chloe said. Her voice was steady now. Good, Isabella said, turning back to face her. Report to HR. They'll issue you a new badge. Welcome to Ether. Chloe nodded. She walked to the door. Before she left, she paused. Isabella? Yes? Thank you. For the pen. Isabella frowned slightly. The pen? The one you made him sign with last night. It was poetic. Isabella smiled. Details matter, Chloe. Never forget that. Chloe walked out. Isabella was alone in the office. She looked around the massive, empty room. It was hers. All of it. But the story wasn't quite over. There was one loose end. One person who hadn't been at the gala. One person who had been the original source of the code Harrison claimed was his. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from an encrypted number. Did you get the keys? Isabella typed back. Yes. It's done. The reply came instantly. Good. Then it's time for phase 2. Isabella put the phone down. Harrison was gone. The board was gone. But the real game, the one she had been playing with a hidden partner for 3 years, was just beginning. The rain in San Francisco didn't wash things clean. It just made the city shine like a circuit board. 6 months had passed since the night of the comet, the media's sensational nickname for the evening, the Black Gulfstream G700, landed at the Nexus Gala. In that time, the landscape of Silicon Valley had shifted beneath everyone's feet. Isabella sat in what used to be Harrison's office on the 45th floor, though no one would recognize it now. The ostentatious mahogany desk, the one Harrison had commissioned from imported Italian timber, was gone. In its place stood a wide, functional standing desk made of reclaimed aluminum. The walls, once covered in ego-stroking portraits of Harrison shaking hands with politicians, were now floor-to-ceiling whiteboards, covered in complex network topologies and flowcharts. The silence here was different now. It wasn't the fearful silence of employees trying not to provoke a volatile CEO. It was the focused hum of productivity. Isabella rubbed her eyes. It was 11:12 p.m. The transition from Nexus Dynamics to Ether Systems had been brutal. The forensic accounting alone had taken 3 months. Her team had uncovered layers of financial rot that went deeper than even she had anticipated. Harrison hadn't just been cooking the books, he had been incinerating them. Speaking of Harrison, he had become a ghost story. The king of Silicon Valley was currently out on bail. The SEC had descended on him with the wrath of the Old Testament. Chloe Danvers, true to her promise, and fueled by the rage of a woman scorned, had provided the district attorney with terabytes of incriminating data. Harrison's assets were frozen. The Napa house, the cars, the boat, all seized. Last week, a tabloid had published a grainy photo of Harrison Smith sitting alone at a dive bar in Oakland, looking bloated and unshaven, staring into a glass of cheap whiskey. He was wearing a tracksuit. The caption read, "System failure." Isabella felt no joy seeing it. She didn't feel pity either. She felt the cold satisfaction of a mathematical equation balancing out. Variable X had been eliminated, but the story wasn't quite finished. There was one variable left to resolve, the most important one. Isabella unlocked the biometric safe built into the side of her desk. She bypassed the sleek, corporate MacBook she used for daily business and pulled out a heavy, battered laptop. It was a Lenovo ThinkPad, at least 8 years old, held together by duct tape and stickers from hackathons in Berlin and Tokyo. This was the machine that built the empire. She booted it up. It didn't run Windows or Mac OS. It ran a custom Linux kernel she had compiled herself. She opened a secure, encrypted communication channel. The connection routed through servers in Iceland, Singapore, and finally, a small, nondescript IP address in upstate New York. A video window popped up. The image was high definition, contrasting sharply with the frail figure on the screen. An old man sat in a motorized wheelchair, positioned by a window overlooking a garden covered in autumn leaves. He had an oxygen cannula in his nose, and his hands were twisted with advanced rheumatoid arthritis. But his eyes, cool, grey, and fiercely intelligent, were identical to Isabella's. "Hello, Dad," Isabella said softly, the corporate steel leaving her voice. Elias Archer smiled. It was a crooked expression, fighting against the paralysis of a stroke he'd suffered 5 years ago, but it was filled with warmth. "Isabella," his voice was raspy, amplified by a speaker system. "I saw the closing bell. Ether is trading at 420 a share." "The market likes stability," Isabella said, leaning back. "We released the patch for the latency issues yesterday. The client feedback is 99% positive." "The patch?" Elias chuckled, the sound rattling in his chest. "You mean you finally removed the anchor you threw overboard 3 years ago?" Isabella smiled, a conspiratorial grin that the board of directors never saw. This was the twist that no journalist had uncovered, the flaw in the Quantum X code, the dependency issue that had plagued Harrison, ruined his reputation, and driven the stock price down to the point where Isabella could buy the debt, wasn't an accident. It wasn't bad coding. "I didn't break it, Dad," Isabella corrected him gently. "I just put it to sleep. I wrote a degradation loop into the kernel before I signed the divorce papers. It was designed to function perfectly for 12 months, then slowly choke the bandwidth by 2% every month after that. Just enough to drive him crazy. Just enough to make him fire his best engineers trying to fix a problem that didn't exist." "A logic bomb," Elias nodded approvingly. "Elegant. Harrison never was one for reading the source code. He only cared about the user interface, the shiny wrapper." "He never looked under the hood," Isabella agreed. "He thought the car ran on magic, not mechanics." Elias's expression turned serious. He looked at the camera, his gaze penetrating. "Did he ever know? Even at the end, did he know who you were?" "No," Isabella said. "To him, I was just Isabella from Ohio, the scholarship girl he met at a coffee shop. He never ran a background check on my maiden name. He was too arrogant to think I came from anything other than poverty. He didn't know he was sleeping next to the daughter of the man his father destroyed," Elias whispered. The history hung in the air between them. This wasn't just a divorce settlement. This was a blood feud. 30 years ago, Elias Archer and Marcus Smith, Harrison's father, had founded the precursor to Nexus. Elias was the genius. Marcus was the shark. In 1998, Marcus had embezzled the operating funds, framed Elias for corporate espionage, and forced him out. Elias lost everything: his patents, his reputation, and his health. Marcus Smith took the code, rebranded it, and built the Smith fortune on a stolen foundation. Harrison had inherited the stolen empire. He had inherited the arrogance, and unknowingly, he had married the instrument of his own destruction. "I signed the transfer papers this morning, Dad," Isabella said, holding up a file. "The intellectual property rights for the original core architecture. They are no longer property of Nexus or Ether. They have been reassigned to the Archer Trust." Elias closed his eyes. A tear tracked through the deep lines of his face. "I don't need the money, Izzy. You know that." "It's not about the money," Isabella said fiercely. "It's about the citation. The history books will be rewritten. Tomorrow, the press release goes out. Ether Systems acknowledges that its foundational technology was architected by Elias Archer. You get your name back." Elias opened his eyes. "You played the long game, sweetheart. Longer and harder than I ever could have. Your mother, she would have been terrified of you, I think." "She would have been proud," Isabella said, her voice catching slightly. "So what now?" Elias asked. "You've conquered Rome. You've burned the usurper. What does the Queen do when the war is over?" Isabella looked out the window at the sprawling city lights. San Francisco was a grid of ambition, millions of people chasing the next big thing. "Now," Isabella said, "now I actually build something. Harrison spent 10 years trying to make products that looked futuristic. I'm going to make products that actually work. We have the defense contracts back. We're moving into medical AI. I'm going to use this company to fix things, Dad. Not just stock prices." "Good," Elias said. His energy was fading. She could see it. "Isabella." "Yes?" "You walked out of that room 3 years ago with a plastic pen and no money. You took the hard road. I want you to know, it was the right road." "I learned from the best," she whispered. "Good night, my CEO." "Good night, Dad." The screen went black. Isabella sat in the darkness for a long time. She felt the weight of the last 3 years lifting. The sleepless nights in Zurich, the anxiety of the hostile takeover, the fear that Harrison would discover the sabotage before she was ready. It was all gone. She stood up and walked to the closet. She grabbed her coat, not the velvet couture she had worn to the gala, but a simple, warm trench coat. She picked up her bag. On her way out, she paused at the door. She looked back at the empty office. Harrison had told her she was nothing. He had said she would come crawling back. He had defined her value by what she could give him. She touched the doorframe. "I didn't take nothing," she whispered to the empty room. "I took my time." She turned off the lights, plunging the office into darkness, and walked toward the elevators. The cleaning crew was in the hallway, buffering the floors. "Evening, Miss Archer," the older man running the buffer called out. "Good evening, Samuel," Isabella replied, stopping to smile at him. A genuine smile. "How is your grandson? Did he get into the coding camp?" "He did," Samuel beamed. "Thanks to that recommendation letter you wrote, he's over the moon." "He's got talent," Isabella said. "Tell him to keep studying the kernel. The interface changes, but the kernel is forever." She stepped into the elevator. As the doors closed, she checked her reflection in the steel panel. She didn't see a vengeful ex-wife. She didn't see a victim. She saw Isabella Archer. The elevator descended, taking her down to the street, where the air was cool and the possibilities were endless. The jet was parked in the hangar, ready for whenever she needed it. The billions were in the bank. But as she walked out into the San Francisco night, Isabella realized that the richest feeling in the world wasn't the number on the balance sheet. It was the feeling of holding the pen and writing your own ending. And that is how the long game is played. Isabella Archer didn't scream, she didn't fight for scraps, and she didn't get bitter. She got better. She realized that her true value wasn't in the assets she left behind, but in the intellect she carried with her. She let Harrison Smith keep the kingdom, knowing full well she held the keys to the castle gates. In the end, she proved that while you can steal a product, you can never steal the genius that created it. This story reminds us that sometimes the most powerful move you can make is to walk away in silence, work in the shadows, and let your success make the noise. What did you guys think of the twist with her father? Did you see the logic bomb coming? I want to hear your theories in the comments. Would you have waited 3 years like Isabella? Or would you have tried to take him down sooner? If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, please hit that like button. It helps us bring more stories like this to life. And if you haven't already, subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss next week's saga. Thank you for watching, and remember, the best revenge is massive success.